This is an advertisement by BetterHelp. January arrives with a sense of expectation and change. But real change is rarely loud or dramatic.
It's noticing what no longer needs to be there. Thoughts you keep turning over even when they're not helping.
And when you live with those long enough, they can start to feel normal until you pause and see them more clearly. That's where perspective helps. Not fixing yourself, just creating space to understand what's been weighing you down.
Therapy can offer that space, a clearer view of your own patterns and what's worth holding on to. BetterHelp makes starting straightforward. You answer a few questions and they match you with a qualified therapist. If it doesn't feel right, you can switch at any time.
Whether you're into New Year's resolutions or not, working to better yourself is something everyone should do. And you don't even need to bulldoze your life to do it. Simply use BetterHelp.
BetterHelp makes it easy to get matched online with a qualified therapist. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/restishistory. That's betterhelp.com/restishistory.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Car shopping shouldn't feel like preparing for a marathon of paperwork. That's why Carvana makes buying and financing your car easy. From start to finish, search thousands of vehicles with great prices. All online, all on your time. And when you're ready, your new car shows up right at your door. It doesn't get better than that. Buy your car the easy way. On Carvana. Delivery fees may apply.
Welcome to The Rest is History, the 12 days of Christmas, or in our case, the 13 days of Christmas, because we couldn't decide when to begin and end it. We have now, of course, reached the 29th of December, which is when you're probably listening to this. And Tom Holland, I think you may have chosen a subject very close to my heart, an event that happened on this day, on the 29th of December, many centuries ago, with which I have a very profound personal connection. Am I right?
You are right, Dominic. It is the murder of Thomas Becket, which has been a great theme of poetry and drama over the years. T.S. Eliot's great play, of course, Murder in the Cathedral. But there was another play, wasn't there?
There was an absolutely first-class play, I think you'll find.
In which you played the Archbishop.
So
perhaps you'd like to tell the listeners about this for the umpteenth time. How many times have you told this story?
I think this is about the second time, Tom, only.
I think it's at least the fourth.
So the French playwright Jean Anouilh wrote a play called Becket, or Becket, as he would no doubt have called it.
What would you have called it?
Becket. He was writing, I can't remember, the 50s or the 60s, and he very much is writing in the sort of aftermath of the Second World War, French resistance, and he casts Thomas Becket. He has a lot of stuff about the Normans and the Saxons. So the Normans are kind of sort of Nazi occupiers, or
and the Saxons are the French.
Are sort of resistance, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And Becket ends up collaborating with the king, and then he refines his sort of Saxonness, and when he finds God, and he ends up being martyred. So I was in a production of this that went to the Edinburgh Festival. So I think we did 2 weeks of rehearsals. Was it only? It might have been a month of rehearsals in London beforehand. They went very badly, I think it's fair to say. And with about a week to go before we went to Edinburgh, the director, who later ended up directing Paddington, he said, "This isn't working at all. This is an absolute shambles. We desperately need to rescue this. And what we'll do is, he did what basically all student plays do when they're desperate. He said, let's set it very explicitly in the Third Reich."
Ah, yes.
And have people dressed as Nazis and all this sort of thing. And I can remember bitterly opposing this, but I was completely outvoted by the rest of the cast, which made me feel very miserable. So we arrived in Edinburgh, and we did it to what I think it's fair to say quite small audiences.
Was it received with critical plaudits?
Well, the Scotsman reviewed it and gave it 2 stars out of 5. and as regular listeners will know, they said teenage bishops and trainers do not exactly convey the majesty of the medieval church. And, you know, I could have played Paddington off the back of that. But it wasn't to be
different.
Yeah, but and you.
Well, so I think that this is an entirely worthy subject, the murder of Thomas Becket.
The murder
both for the role that it's played in your life.
Yeah, Well,
but also as a key event in
I think
in
some
English history.
critics would say he's been murdered twice. Once by Henry II's knights, and once by some students from England.
No, but clearly not, because the director of Paddington, a wonderful film, obviously thought that your performance was charismatic and powerful enough that you could play Macbeth.
Yeah, and Paddington. Well, I'm Paddington. I'm assuming that. Yeah. I mean, it seems to be obvious that he would have wanted me to play Paddington after Macbeth.
Okay.
But that offer has never explicitly been made.
Dominic, have you talked enough about your?
Probably not, actually.
Is there anything else you'd like?
Do you want to talk about?
You'd like to share? Shall we talk about Thomas Becket?
Talk about Thomas Becket. Who is Thomas Becket for those people who are still?
Okay, so Thomas Becket. We talked about him in the World Cup of Kings because, of course, his great opponent, erstwhile friend, opponent, Henry II. And Thomas Becket is a Londoner, so he grew up not far from Cornhill, where we were for our Christmas Carol episode. So he grew up on Cheapside.
I see him like Ray Winston or Danny Dyer.
I don't think he was like Danny Dyer, but that's kind of a nice idea. And he was a kind of hung out with Henry II. Henry II felt he was very much his creature because he was, relatively speaking, of humble stock. Makes him chancellor, and then Henry is having a massive run-in with the Pope, with the Church, and thinks it would be a tremendous wheeze to appoint Thomas to become Archbishop of Canterbury, on the assumption that Thomas will continue to, be a lad and do what Henry wants.
So they're carousing and stuff together, aren't they?
Oh, that kind of stuff. Yeah. They're kind of massive lads together. The moment he becomes Archbishop, Thomas becomes this deeply saintly figure. And he takes Henry on, and relations between them get worse and worse. And Thomas ends up going into exile. And there's, it's a terrible business. And by 1170, negotiations between Henry II, the Pope, Thomas, the King of France, all the kind of various people who are embroiled in this, what's become a massive international scandal. They've patched together, I guess, what is the kind of medieval equivalent of a Brexit deal, in that it's just about looks as though, it's kind of okay, but there are all kinds of problems with it and hostages to fortune. So this is in 1170, and 1st of December, Thomas lands back in England at Sandwich, and he travels along the road to Canterbury. And he's greeted ecstatically by the people of Kent, who all kind of hail him as, the friend of widows and the patron of orphans and all this kind of stuff. And one chronicler compares him to Christ entering Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. So this doesn't obviously improve the mood.
Yeah, Henry must be delighted by this.
It doesn't improve the well. Henry's not delighted, but also that there are other people. So there's a guy called Ranulph de Broc, who's a local landowner, who's been given a castle called Saltwood, which traditionally belongs to the Archbishops of Canterbury.
Doesn't that end up being owned by Alan Clark?
It does. Yes, it does. And Jane Clark, his wife, still lives there to this day. It's where David Davis went all around the battlements while drunk.
Really?
So yeah, it has a very checkered history. But Ranulph de Broc is obviously not pleased at having Becket back. And he's busy stirring up trouble with Henry, who's just over the channel in Normandy. And there are various other people who are also furious with Thomas, chief of whom are 3 bishops. So the Archbishop of York, the Bishop of London, and the Bishop of Salisbury.
Oh, Salisbury.
Yeah, I'm afraid the Bishop of Salisbury doesn't come out of this well.
Oh, dear.
So they have been in York, and they have crowned Henry's son, who's also called Henry, as king.
Henry the Young King.
Henry the Young King. I think he's about 15 or something. So he's kind of teenager. And Thomas is livid about this because only the Archbishop of Canterbury can crown kings of England. That's the rule.
Yeah.
Archbishop of York can't muzzle in. So he's furious about this. He demands an apology. They refuse to apologise. So Thomas excommunicates them. And he's done this even before he lands in England. The 3 bishops come down. They have a big bust up with Thomas. They then go storming off. They take ship. They cross to Normandy. They come to Henry, and they say that the bust up hasn't just, it's not been about the argument about who should do the crowning, the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Archbishop of York. It's been because Thomas is questioning whether Henry has the right to be crowned as king. So Henry feels that the entire legitimacy of his dynasty is being questioned.
Yeah.
And even though this is a
Are they making this up?
They're basically making it up.
What, snakes? The Bishop of Salisbury, what a snake.
Yeah, and you know what the uncle of the Bishop of Salisbury says when he hears this?
The
only way to deal with such a man is to hang him on a gibbet.
He's not wrong.
Yeah, if it had been true, but it wasn't true.
Oh, he's talking about Becket. I thought he was talking about the Bishop of Salisbury.
No, he's talking about Becket.
Oh, that's poor.
So there's this kind of rhubarb, which you'd know as an actor.
Of course.
From all the kind of the aristocrats and people at Henry's court. And we have various reports as to what Henry then said.
Does he say, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest"?
Well, he either says, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nourished and promoted in my realm, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born clerk."
Ooh, that's strong. That's good. I like that.
"A man who has eaten my bread, who came to my court poor, and I have raised him high. Now he draws up his heel to kick me in the teeth. He has shamed my kin, shamed my realm. The grief goes to my heart, and no one has avenged me."
That's also strong and good. Good lines.
"How many cowardly, useless drones have I nourished that not even a single one is willing to avenge me of the wrongs I have suffered?" So those are the three reports from contemporaries.
So he never says, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest"?
Nope. 18th century.
Well, that's a revelation to me. So in this entire podcast series, going back to when we started, 2020, this is the most exciting thing I've learned.
Yeah.
That's overturned my previous convictions.
That's what this podcast is all about, isn't it?
Yes, but it's pushed back against the herd mentality that's taken root in my mind.
But two of those statements kind of point out why Henry is particularly furious, and that is that he's a massive snob.
Yeah,
because what he's harping on,
low-born,
exactly. Yeah. So he's harping on the fact that it's not just that Thomas is opposing him; it's the fact that he's low-born, that he dares to stand up to me, the king.
Henry II is Virginia Woolf.
That is what is driving him. Yes, well, it's all in Kent as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that basically is what's pissing Henry off, and he's having one of his rages, and he's prone to rages. You know, he'll kind of pull his clothes off and eat straw and spit and scream and gibber and punch the wall.
That's very unbecoming behaviour from a Plantagenet warlord.
Well, John does it as well, doesn't he? I mean, all the Plantagenets are giving to kind of chewing straw and hitting walls with fists. So anyway, that's basically what Henry's doing. And most people, when he gets in a mood like this, they know better than to take him seriously.
Yeah.
But there are four knights who are of obscure background, who don't know Henry well, who are not versed in his character, who are keen to make a mark for themselves. So Reginald Fitzurse, William de Tracy, Richard Brito, and Hugh de Morville. Anyway, so these four knights get on their horses, go galloping to the Channel, get on ship, cross over, where they rendezvous in Saltwood Castle, hang out with Ranulph de Broc.
Right.
And they then head on to Canterbury, and they arrive there in the afternoon. And Ranulph de Broc brings all his men-at-arms with him, and they seal off the city, essentially, so that Thomas won't be able to escape. The knights go bursting into the Archbishop's Hall, where Thomas is kind of hanging out. They confront him. Thomas very much holds his own, sends them packing. They're not thrilled by that. They go out. They then try to break back in, but by this point it's all been locked up. So they traipse through an orchard. They climb up a ladder. They break in that way. But by this point, Thomas has gone to Vespers.
Yeah.
And he walks into the cathedral, and the various monks bar the doors behind them because they're worried about what's going to happen. And Thomas says, "No, open. You know, this is the Church of God. It must be open to all comers." So he orders the bolts to be slid open, doors to be opened, so that he knows what he's doing. He's courting martyrdom. And the knights come in. Becket could easily have fled. I mean, he could easily have hidden. It's very dark by this point. You know, the shadows are lengthening.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. He stands his ground, and he gets kind of brutally murdered. And we've already talked about this, about how there is one blow that is so brutal that it slices through the crown of his skull. So like the top of an egg being sliced off with a knife. And the sword comes down with such force that it sends sparks flying in the air. And so his brains start to seep out across the floor. And one of the other knights then takes his sword and scrapes all the brains out of the skull.
This is meant to be a festive podcast, Tom.
Yeah, it kind of is. I mean, it's one of the great feast days, the martyrdom of Becket, that then gets forgotten with the Reformation, obviously.
Have you seen the version of this in The Blackadder?
No.
The medieval first series of what
I must have
Blackadder.
done.
So in that, Edmund Rowan Atkinson is made Archbishop of Canterbury, and knights attack him. But he and Baldric and Percy, his mates, disguise themselves as nuns.
Oh, yeah. Well, that doesn't happen with Thomas, who very bravely accepts his martyrdom.
Yeah.
And, the guy who is Hugh de Morville, I think it is scraping the brains out with his sword. And he keeps yelling out, "He won't be getting up again. He won't be getting up again."
No.
As he kind of spatters the brains all over the floor. So that's the martyrdom of Thomas. They go galloping off into the night. Henry, of course, has brought the news, and he goes, wasn't sure about. I mean, he pretends to be terribly upset. I don't think he is particularly.
He's probably slightly relieved that Thomas has gone, isn't he?
I think he is relieved.
But he also knows that this has opened a terrible kind of.
Well, yes, because immediately Thomas's relics start to perform miracles.
Yeah.
And it becomes this great place of pilgrimage. And in the end, Henry submits to, the public humiliation of walking barefoot through Canterbury and being birched by monks and things, simply so that he can kind of buy into the charisma of the martyred archbishop. And so it remains, the great centre of pilgrimage for centuries and centuries. It's where the Canterbury pilgrims go in Chaucer's poem. And for obvious reasons, Henry VIII hates it.
Yeah.
Absolutely hates it. And so it becomes the particular object of the fury of his reformers.
So I was going to ask a question about Thomas Becket. Do you think that you can draw a faint line between Thomas Becket and people like Thomas Cromwell, centuries later? Lowborn, risen up, king's sort of pal and minister.
Both Londoners.
Yeah, becoming involved with the church, all that stuff.
Except that Thomas Cromwell is the great servant of the king.
Exactly. So in some ways, was Henry II, do you think, expecting that Thomas Becket would be
a Cromwell? Yes.
Would be a Cromwell, yeah, exactly.
Or a Wolsey, I think, more likely.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
And Becket's refusal to do that was.
Well, that's certainly what I tried to work into my performance, and it's a shame that the Scotsman never recognised that. But
you weren't in Murder in the Cathedral.
No, I wasn't.
Which is a great play, I think.
I've never seen that or read it.
Very powerful. Great lines on how tempting it is to be a martyr.
Right.
Now is my way clear, now is the meaning plain. Temptation shall not come in this kind again. The last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right deed for the wrong reason. I can imagine you saying that.
Yeah, I can.
In the trainers.
We've had poetry before, William McGonagall, and now we've had T.S. Eliot.
Yeah.
We've hit, both
the poetry vein.
We have. Right. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back with some Native Americans. See you after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending, and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions, and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
Hello, welcome back to The Rest is History with our celebration of the 29th of December. And it's a rather morbid celebration because we've already had the murder of Thomas Becket, rather brutal assassination in the heart of Canterbury Cathedral. And now, Dominic, you've got more.
I've got a shocking story, a really brutal story. So it's the Massacre at Wounded Knee on the 29th of December, 1890. So we did a podcast earlier in the year.
The Wild West, didn't
the
it?
Wild West, that was enormously enjoyable. I loved doing that. It's such an interesting subject. And we haven't really done much American sort of Western history. And we haven't done any kind of Native American history at all, really, have we? So this is the most famous incident, probably apart from the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Probably the single most famous incident in the sorry history of the interaction between European Americans. And
it's given its name to the title of D. Brown's famous revisionist work on
Native
Americans in the West. Bury My Heart, Wounded Knee.
And I also thought this was a good story, Tom, because it's kind of a gift to you, because it's partly about the influence of Christianity, isn't it?
I know, yes, it is.
So let's set the scene a bit. So we are in the kind of Great Plains of the United States. Specifically, we are in South Dakota, what we know as South Dakota. The US Army has been campaigning basically for years, for decades, to subdue the Plains Indians. The arrival of the railroads has done tremendous damage to the kind of ecosystem on which the Indians rely. So they relied, of course, on the bison and so on. That's largely gone.
Quite deliberately, right? I mean, that's because we talked about that in the Wild West episode.
Exactly.
The deliberate extermination of the bison.
Their world has fallen apart, and their world has fallen apart deliberately because white settlers have taken it upon themselves deliberately to destroy that world. Often Union generals who've been involved in the Civil War, play a big part in that, Washington politicians as well. So by this point, so let's pick up in the sort of late 1880s, the Lakota Sioux, so the Sioux, probably one of the most famous.
Yeah, the victors at Bighorn.
Indian groups, they are on reservations by and large. And they're finding that really tough. So that basically the US government is encouraging them to become agriculturalists, to plant crops, to become basically farmers.
And not to go hunting buffalo. And
that's completely, that's not really part of their culture. They're completely unsuited to it. They are being encouraged by federal agents of the Bureau of Indian Affairs to wear Western clothes, to dress in sort of suits and trousers and stuff, to speak English, crucially, to abandon their traditional religion and to embrace Christianity. So their sort of mental and imaginative world is collapsing, and they're being forced to adopt all these sort of new and strange things. But at the same time, there's a series of harsh winters and droughts and things. They don't have much food. They're reliant on government rations, which are being sort of stripped back because the government is cutting them. So they're in a terrible state, basically. And then at the beginning of 1890, this cultish movement sweeps through the reservations of the plains.
The ghost dance.
The ghost dance. Now, it's an absolutely fascinating thing. It has been around for a while, but it is revived by a kind of Indian prophet almost, who's a man called Wovoka. Now, his father had been a ghost dancer and had taught his son about it. His son has been raised among people by ranchers who have exposed him and his friends to Christianity. So a kind of messianic religion is in his mind. It's in the ether.
That Jesus will come again.
Exactly. And now the story goes that there's an eclipse on New Year's Day, 1889, I think it is. And he falls asleep or goes into a kind of trance. And God tells him that if the Indians do this ritual dance, this circular dance, and follow these instructions, then in 2 years' time, God will return the earth to the state that it was in before the Americans, the white settlers, arrived.
And the buffalo will come back. That's what I always find so tragic.
The buffalo will return, and the white settlers themselves will be buried under 30 feet of soil, and that the Indians' ancestors will rise from the dead.
And that's why it's a ghost dance, right?
Right, exactly. Now you can see where Christianity may have seeped into this. The idea of being risen from the dead, the idea of the second coming, all of this sort of stuff. And among the Lakota Sioux, this becomes an incredibly powerful message. People want to hear it. Of course they do, because their lives are so terrible. So they start wearing these white shirts called ghost shirts, where they've painted them with or decorated them with sacred symbols. And they are told, or tell themselves, that these symbols will protect them against American army bullets. So the movement spreads and spreads and spreads throughout 1889, 1890. And the federal agents are very put out by this. They don't understand it. They're worried about it. They think it has potential to become a kind of insurgency. And basically by November 1890, the US Army is being sent into the plains and told, stop the ghost dance, round them up and get them to stop it. So the first instance of this, they try to round up a load of Sioux who are living near the Standing Rock Agency with Sitting Bull, the great chief, who had famously been one of the people who had led the Indians at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, when Custer and the 7th Cavalry had been defeated. Well, so I think it's December the 15th. They're rounded up. There's a sort of bit of a struggle. Some of the Sioux are killed, and one of them is Sitting Bull. And
there's a terrible story about that Sitting Bull had been with Buffalo Bill on the the Wild West show.
Yes.
And so the horse had been trained to dance to the sound of rifle fire. And so when Sitting Bull gets shot, he falls and he's bleeding into the dust, and his horse starts to dance.
That's a terrible story, Tom.
It's a terrible story.
This is such a depressing episode of our podcast.
I know, it's just kind of blood everywhere.
So there's that, and that when that news of this reaches the other Sioux and the other reservations, they are absolutely horrified by this. Some of them start kind of gathering. They're prepared for what they see as a showdown with the US Army.
And do you think is it in an apocalyptic mood?
I think so, absolutely.
They must know that they can't. By conventional standards, they haven't got a hope. But...
Absolutely. I think they absolutely... So some of them perhaps are caught up with kind of religious hysteria almost and think they can win. But I suspect most of them, as you say, there is an apocalyptic, not quite suicidal, but there is definitely an apocalyptic sense, which is, of course, built into the cult. So there's a guy called Red Cloud who is trying to do a deal with the Americans, and he's on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and some of the Indians are trying to get to the Pine Ridge Reservation where they can unite with Red Cloud and so on. And among one of the groups who are trying to get to Pine Ridge are a group of Miniconjou Lakota Sioux, and they are led by a guy called Bigfoot. So his real name is Sitanka, but the Americans know him as Bigfoot. And Bigfoot gets about 350 of these guys, and he says, I say guys, men, women, and children, says, let's get to Pine Ridge, unite with Red Cloud, and hopefully it'll be okay. Off they go. The Americans hear that they're moving and get in a flap about it, and they send the 7th Cavalry. So basically the very, the sort of part of the army that has been beaten at Little Bighorn to intercept them. And on the 29th of December, they basically the American 7th Cavalry round up these people, and they'd say, we're going to confiscate all your weapons. So they basically herd them into a clearing. They surround the clearing with cavalry. They position guns facing, because the Americans, of course, are frightened themselves. Or they don't understand the ghost dance. They don't understand the Indians. So it's all sort of set up. The 7th Cavalry starts searching them for weapons, and at this point, a man called Sits Straight starts to dance the ghost dance. Now you can it's an act of, why is he doing it? Act of defiance, because he himself is frightened.
An act of defiance, but also perhaps an attempt to invoke the second coming.
Yeah, maybe. And he says to the others, don't worry, our white shirts mean that we can't be hurt by the Americans' bullets. So this dance becomes more and more kind of frenzied, sort of whirling dance. And the American soldiers become more and more anxious. You can almost
trigger happy,
sense their fingers tensing on the triggers. And basically it's at this point that one of the Indians, who's a guy called Black Coyote, is told to give up his gun. He is deaf, so he doesn't understand or hear, and something then happens. It's not clear. A gun goes off. Maybe it's his gun. The 7th Cavalry, who are so trigger happy and nervous, you can imagine the scene. Yeah. They start shooting. Suddenly all hell is breaking loose. Everybody is shooting. Probably within moments, most of the casualties happen at first, and they are enormous casualties. So the Americans,
women and children,
start blasting away. Accounts of what happened they conflict, and there are sort of debates about what happened. But we do know that about 146 of the Indians were later buried in a mass grave, but probably about 300 of them were killed in total, and about half of them are women and children. So it's a genuine massacre. It's that classic thing that you get with, if ever you read about massacres in history, that it starts by accident and then it becomes a kind of addictive frenzy and everybody starts shooting. And once they've started, they can't stop until everybody is dead. So the officers lose control. Everybody's kind of, pouring bullets into these defenseless people. At least about 25 of the American soldiers themselves were killed, probably by their own side. Because, they're in a circle. So they're almost firing on each other. So it's this horrendous scene. And what happens at first is the Bureau of Indian Affairs says it's basically a battle. We were attacked by Indians and we were defending ourselves. But very soon it comes out that it was a massacre, and it becomes this terrible sort of stain on.
Well, because also, it draws a line under direct combat, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's always the final chapter of every book, isn't it?
But also, if you were writing a script of the tragedy of the Native Americans in the United States, you couldn't have written a more moving or upsetting climax to it, really.
Exactly right. It's the perfect. It's in a way, it's kind of microcosm, or it's a kind of metaphor for
kind of blood seeping out into the snow.
For the wider story.
Miserable.
Exactly, very miserable. The guy who was the commanding officer, a guy called Forsyth, there's an investigation into him. He's temporarily stripped of his command, but the investigation finds that he was innocent and he's restored to his post. So, that in a way is not surprising. That's exactly always going to happen because, in a way, I don't want to be too strident about this, but what's undoubtedly true is that in the 19th century, I think white sort of European Americans didn't really admit to themselves the extent of what was happening to the Indians. It's still not. We talked about this in the Wild West podcast. The great American sin is perceived as being slavery, isn't it? And the arguments about the African Americans' sort of place in the United States, their history in the United States, they're incredibly resonant and contested, and all of this. And what happened to the Native Americans? It feels like a smaller story, doesn't it? It doesn't get discussed as much. It doesn't get. There aren't such high profile campaigns. It's not, but it should be.
But because there aren't as many. And we know why there aren't as many, because they've all been wiped out. Yeah. But I'm kind of thinking there are certain kind of parallels between the two stories, the two periods that we've looked at. And one is that there's a kind of sense of delayed acknowledgement of guilt on the part of Henry II. He kind of says, it's a terrible thing, whatever. And then it's only gradually that he comes to realize how potent an episode it's been and how he wants to get on the right side of it.
Yeah.
And you could say that a kind of slightly similar process has happened with Wounded Knee, that it's taken time for, white people, I guess. The United States apparatus of the United States government, however you want to put it, to kind of fully acknowledge the scale of what happened. And to recognize that there is a kind of power in that martyrdom, because there's a reason why it's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, why that's such an evocative name, and why that book had such an impact, to the degree that I think it'd be very difficult ever again to portray cowboys and Indians where the Indians are the baddies. I just don't think you could ever do that again. It's
also post Dances with Wolves, though, isn't it, Tom? Don't you think Dances with Wolves?
But I think Dances with Wolves was so influenced by Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee.
Yeah.
I think there's kind of, with both of them, I think there was a kind of sense of delayed shock. And with both of them, there's a sense that there is a kind of, dare I say, sacral power to be had.
Yeah.
In martyrdom.
In 1973, when Indian activists wanted to protest against their treatment, they occupy the site of Wounded Knee. It's Wounded Knee that they choose. The protest against it's during the Nixon years. It's not specifically against Nixon. It's against the sort of the American government more generally, and their neglect. I mean, that's the site they choose for absolutely understandable reasons.
Yeah.
I suppose that I would buy that a bit more about its power if it had led to, if recognition of, since D. Brown's book, had led to any kind of real change in the plight of American Indians. They're still the sort of forgotten victims, aren't they? Don't you think?
Maybe, but I think they have. I think that their sufferings have a much higher prominence now than they did.
No, they did in the 50s, let's say.
And I think that if you think about maybe the resentment that's generated, as well as the kind of sympathy, perhaps then you get also. I mean, maybe I'm stretching things here, but you get the sense of what was at stake when Henry VIII destroyed Becket's tomb. The power of a martyr can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
To those who feel menaced by it.
This is absolutely heroic work, Tom, to link these two.
Well,
no podcast in history has ever tried to draw a link between the death of Thomas Becket and the Wounded Knee.
Do you not think that there's a kind of parallel there? I think there's a kind of, very distant echo, but
the memory of martyrdom, I suppose.
The power of martyrdom, both rank as martyrs.
Yes, I suppose so.
There's a slight echo in the Wounded Knee Massacre as well of the Massacre of the Innocents, which we talked about earlier. I mean, there's that, the spectacle of large numbers of innocent people being slaughtered.
Yeah. Well, American history has these massacres. So My or whatever, I can't remember how to pronounce it. The Massacre of Vietnamese during the Vietnam War is the other great famous massacre in American history. And again, I mean, there are some people. I mean, I doubt many listeners to this podcast, but there will be some people who would kind of roll their eyes at mention of this and say, "Oh, God's sake, shut up! Don't be so woke. What woke tosh?" To quote people about the victory of Athelstan in the Rest is History World Cup. I mean, I don't think it is woke tosh, but there you go. And since I'm the arbiter,
you can decide.
Yeah, I have decided.
Okay.
It's not right. We're just wittering, Tom. We're just rambling now.
We are. But I think also there's a particular quality to tragedy in the depth of winter.
A sacral quality, Tom?
Maybe. It's the conjunction of red and white.
It's the blood in the snow. There is something.
It's the blood and snow.
Yeah. Well, I think isn't that also because the Indian story is usually perceived in popular culture as the Cowboys and Indians story is perceived as having played out in the heat of the desert or the heat of the plains. And the fact that the final chapter is in the snow makes it feel all the more kind of tragic.
The ice.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that cheery note, we will bid you farewell. We'll be back tomorrow with December the 30th.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community, please sign up at restishistorypod.com. That's restishistorypod.com.